I wonder who... That's strange. Handwritten.
The Words of a Scout by Lester Hiram Conrad.
It's a journal.
You are the first to look upon these here writings. Read on if you have a hankering to take the great American journey.
This cabin is old.
Good, that's just fine. Came from east of the Appalachians I did, a scout by trade. During the 1800s, many Americans began to move west across the Appalachians. These Americans, who were among the first to explore and settle in an area not known to them, were known as pioneers. The area where they were headed was known as the frontier, which is a word to describe the edge of a settled area. These pioneers had heard that the prairies in the middle of the country had rich land for farming. One of the places many pioneers settled was the Ohio River Valley. This large area of land would one day become the states of Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio. As more people settled in the Ohio River Valley, people already living there moved farther west. One such person was Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was born in a small Kentucky log cabin on February 12th in 1809. When he was 7, his parents moved the family west to Indiana to buy farmland from the government. Daniel Boone was one of the earliest and best-known American pioneers to cross the Appalachians. Soon after Boone reached Kentucky, other people made their way over these mountains. At first, there was some trouble with the Indians, but soon a treaty was signed, and a road was cleared to Kentucky. Boone then began leading families over the mountains, though it was a slow, hard trip. Over the next few years, thousands of people made the trip over the Appalachians and settled as far west as the Mississippi River. The westward movement soon grew larger as more people were seeking good land. In 1790, almost all American settlers lived within 50 miles of the Atlantic coast. But in less than 50 years, more than 4 million people had moved west of the Appalachians. The national government encouraged these pioneers by selling land for as little as $1 an acre in some areas. The government also paid to build roads and canals to the Middle West. In time, immigrants, folks from other countries, joined the move west. Thousands had fled Europe. Because of bad harvest, wars, and other problems, they saw the American West as a chance to start over. Since good land along the Atlantic coast was expensive, they too pushed farther west. Pioneers had to make a long, hard journey to their new homes. It was up to me to scout the way. Once the pioneers crossed the Appalachian Mountains, it was hard for them to get supplies, so they had to carry the supplies with them over the mountains. There were some pioneers who chose not to cross the Appalachian Mountains. They traveled to the frontier by way of the Mississippi River. By river, these pioneers could carry their supplies with them on either canoes or flatboats. A flatboat could move a family from Pittsburgh to New Orleans, or anywhere in between. These large flat-bottom boats could carry 2 or 3 families at a time. Now, the pioneers who traveled on foot considered themselves plumb lucky if they found a trail leading west. One such trail was a wilderness road that stretched from the Appalachian Mountains to the Ohio River. As more roads were built, many pioneers traveled by Conestoga wagon. These sturdy covered wagons carried baggage, furniture, food, tools, bedding, and people over rough roads. To protect their cargo from the wind, rain, and sun, people stretched sheets of heavy cloth over a wooden frame above the wagon. Conestoga wagons were pulled by mules, horses, or oxen. The wagons carried a lot, but travel was slow, just 25 miles per day.
Wow, Dad drives 25 miles to work every morning in just 30 minutes.
Bad roads, river crossings, and repairs often made travel even slower than that. Once we reached our new homes, there were even more challenges ahead. For example, after buying land from a land developer, families in the Ohio River Valley had to clear thick forests to build their homes and free up land for farming. Most pioneers in Kentucky lived in log cabins because they were quick and easy to build. Before the pioneers cleared the interior plains, they were covered with prairie grasses. Pioneers took a fancy to the prairie grasses because underneath it was fertile soil for farming. In the plains, there was no lumber to be found, so pioneer families had to use what they could find to build houses. Sod was very popular in the construction of a house. Sod is a layer of soil held together by the roots of grasses. It took about an acre of sod to make a one-room soddy, as sod houses were called. Soddies were made by cutting blocks of sod from the prairies, and then piled on each other to form walls. Then they would lay strips of sod over corn stalks or brush to make a roof. Some pioneers bought lumber to make a wooden frame for their roof. They'd fill the cracks with sod to keep the wind out. Soddies stayed cool in the summer and warm in the winter, and they did not burn easily. But soddies tended to be damp, dirty, and filled with the insects and small animals that naturally lived in the soil. After clearing their land and building a home, some pioneers used a wooden plow to dig furrows or grooves for planting. This was slow work. 3 workers and a pair of oxen might take all day to plow a single acre of land. The pioneers found the Great Plain land to be very difficult for planting. The sod that covered the prairies of the interior plains was too thick for wooden plows to cut through. But in the 1830s, a blacksmith named John Deere of Grand Detour, Illinois, shaped a steel saw into a plow blade. His invention made plowing a much easier task on the interior plain. Since pioneers were often a long way from towns, stores, and neighbors, they had to be self-sufficient and do everything by themselves. They built their own homes, grew their own food, and made their own clothes, tools, soap, and candles. They hunted deer, rabbit, and other game. They planted corn, beans, and potatoes. The pioneers also learned to barter or trade with the Indians. They would trade furs, tobacco, cotton, and corn for cloth and other useful goods. When a pioneer family needed to buy something, most didn't have actual money, so they often paid with deer hides. Pioneer life was tough. There were many who could not take the lonely prairie life, so they returned to the east. But my job was to blaze a trail ahead. The Midwest was a frontier no more. I moved on west. Shortly after the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1804 and 1805, pioneers began to move even further west, across the Rocky Mountains. Trappers found passes that made travel to California and Oregon easier. In 1834, Christian missionaries journeyed to the Oregon country, which is made up of present-day Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and parts of Montana and Wyoming. In 1836, Narcissa and Marcus Whitman and Henry and Eliza Spalding set up missions near the Walla Walla Valley. Here they hoped to teach Christianity to the Indians. Because land in the West could be had for little or no money at all, pioneers found the opportunity to own land too good to pass up. Some folks moved west just because it was less crowded. In 1842, the first wagon train to travel on the Oregon Trail left Missouri in May and arrived in Oregon 6 months later. About 100 people made the journey, and the route they took came to be known as the Oregon Trail. The Oregon Trail led northwest more than 2,000 miles, from Independence, Missouri to the Platte River. The pioneers then traveled across the Continental Divide, which is an imaginary line that runs north and south along the highest points of the Rocky Mountains. The trail then continued to the Snake and Columbia Rivers. In 1845, the words Manifest Destiny were heard for the first time. Manifest Destiny was the belief shared by many Americans that it was a certain future of the United States to stretch from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. By 1852, there were more than 10,000 pioneers on the Oregon Trail, traveling in groups called wagon trains. Wagons ho! Quite a few wagon trains left from Independence, Missouri, because there were shops that sold supplies and animals for the long journey west. This was known as the jump-off point. In time, thousands of people came to St. Louis on their way to settle in Oregon and California. St. Louis became a gateway, or an entrance to the west. The journey on the Oregon Trail was very hard. It could take as long as 6 months. The passes were steep, and snowstorms or rock slides could happen at any time. Still, sudden storms soaked travelers. Wagons broke down, rivers had to be crossed, and many people died along the way. When the people traveled together, they could depend on one another. During the day, the wagon train traveled in a straight line, but at night, wagons were set up in a circle. People would meet in the circle to discuss their problems. Children would play games, and everyone helped each other. Those children had a lot of responsibilities. They helped cook and wash dishes. They watched their siblings during the day. They milked cows and helped tie animals at night.
I'm not going to complain about chores ever again.
Sometimes the pioneers would meet up with Indians along the trail. Some Indian tribes fought with the pioneers to keep them from taking their lands, while other tribes helped the pioneers. As many people reached Oregon, the settlements there grew quickly, especially around Oregon City, Oregon. Some people farmed, others opened shops, and some looked for gold. Life as a pioneer was not easy. Sacrifices were made. Many people arrived with no money and few belongings to start their new lives. Pioneers often left friends and family behind. In 1860, a group of men created the Pony Express to help pioneers keep in touch with their loved ones back home in the East. The Pony Express was a team of daring horseback riders who rode across the western United States to deliver mail from one place to another. They would hand off the mail to another rider who would continue the route.
So that's what started the Pony Express.
In 1846, Brigham Young led a group of Mormon people west and past the Rockies. The Mormons were a group of pioneers who were in search of religious freedom. In July of 1847, the Mormons reached the Great Salt Lake Valley in what is now Utah. Young chose to settle this land because he thought no other settlers would want it. The land was hot and dry, and the lake was saltier than the ocean. But the Mormons built irrigation canals. Those canals brought water from the mountains to irrigate their farms. They made that desert land grow crops of grain, fruits, and vegetables. This settlement would come to be called Salt Lake City.
I've been there.
Many settlers headed west to look for gold. Gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in California in 1848, and the word spread like wildfire. People from all over the U.S. and other countries made their way out west to search for riches. Less than a year later, after the Sutter's Mill gold discovery, 30,000 gold seekers flooded into California. These gold seekers were known as 49ers because they arrived to seek their fortunes in 1849. Most 49ers came by the way of the Oregon-California Trail, but some traveled by ship around Cape Horn at the tip of South America. Gold was also discovered at Pikes Peak, Colorado, along Montana's Yellowstone River, and in the mountains of Alaska, Idaho, and South Dakota. From the shores of the east, over the Appalachians, and across the raging rivers, I blazed forward with a spirit in my heart, a spirit that would get me through the hardships of the wild frontier, unfriendly Indians, treacherous weather, and great rocky mountains. Yes, sirree, that spirit, like the spirit that lived in many other folks, was battered but not broken. And that spirit gave me a new life. From the words of a scout, that is my tale. My only request is that my words and the journey not be forgotten.
I won't forget, Lester. the journey.